Welcome to Unadulterated Adultery Confessions channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. I watched Edward from across the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His shoulders were slumped, and he stared at the surface as if the answer to his turmoil would reveal itself in the swirls of cream he had stirred. Absent-minded, "She's different now, Mom." He finally said, his voice low. "I can't put my finger on it, but something's changed with Sophia." I folded my hands in my lap, forcing my fingers to stay. Still, there was an ache in my C*******T that I couldn't quite place, an odd tension that had been building for weeks now. It had started with the way Edward looked at me, sometimes with that hesitant curiosity like he was trying to decipher something unspoken between us. And perhaps he was. Perhaps he had noticed the things I refused to admit to myself. I exhaled softly and gave him a gentle smile. People change, sweethearts. Maybe she's going through something and doesn't know how to talk about it. He nodded, running a hand through his dark hair. Yeah, maybe, but there was doubt in his voice. Sophia had been part of his life for 3 years now. She was polite, charming when she wanted to be, and I had liked her well enough. But lately there was something off about her, something distant in her eyes when she came over for dinner, the way she barely touched his arm anymore, how her phone seemed more interesting than his stories. I had seen the slow unraveling before he did, though I wished I hadn't. Edward was the kind of man who loved deeply, and the thought of him hurting made something inside me twist painfully. His fingers tapped against the porcelain rim of the mug. "I just don't get it. We were good, she used to light up when she saw me. But now I don't know. Maybe I'm just imagining things you're not," I admitted quietly. His gaze snapped to mine, searching. "Then what do I do?" I wanted to tell him to let go before it hurt more. I wanted to tell him that sometimes, no matter how much we love someone, we can't force them to love us back in the way we deserve. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with thoughts I didn't dare voice. Instead, I reached for his hand, squeezing it lightly. "Talk to what's wrong. And if she doesn't give you an answer, then maybe you already have one." He sighed, rubbing his thumb over my knuckles in an absent-minded gesture of comfort. My stomach fluttered, and I hated myself for it. This was Edward, my son, my boy, who still called me when he needed advice, who had slept, curled against my side as a child. When he had nightmares, I had raised him, nurtured him, watched him grow into the man he was now, and yet I forced the thought away, pulling my hand back before I could dwell on the warmth of his skin. Edward gave me a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," I said, and I meant it. He left not long after heading out to meet Sophia, and I was left alone in the quiet of the house that had become too big since my husband left. The silence pressed against me, heavy, suffocating. I went about my evening the way I always did, cleaning dishes that weren't dirty, straightening pillows that were already in place. I tried to read, but the words blurred together. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flicker of something in Edward's gaze, something unreadable, something dangerous. I missed being wanted. I missed hands tracing the curve of my back. In the middle of the night, I missed whispered words against my skin. The feeling of knowing I was someone's first thought in the morning and their last at night. I curled onto my side, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting into forbidden corners, and in the quiet, with no one there to witness it, I let myself wonder just for a moment what it would feel like if someone looked at me the way Edward looked at Sophia. I pressed a hand to my C******T, willing my heartbeat to slow. This was loneliness. This was longing, and it was dangerous. Edward came home with a bang. The front door slammed so hard that the walls shook, the picture frames rattling in protest. I flinched but stayed still on the couch, gripping the blanket over my lap, my fingers curling into the fabric. He was back from seeing Sophia. I knew it without needing to ask. His footsteps were heavy, dragging as he stormed past the living room. Without looking at me, I could feel the weight of his presence, the frustration radiating off him like heat. I wanted to say something to call out his name, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I listened as he climbed the stairs. Creak of each step punctuated the silence between us. Then his door slammed shut. I exhaled slowly. He was hurting. I had seen it coming before he had. The way Sophia had grown distant, the way she no longer looked at him with the same warmth. I had watched the slow unraveling in the background, and yet no matter how much I had prepared for this moment, it still hurt to see my son like this. I wanted to go to him for years. I had been the one to wipe his tears, to hold him close when the world felt too big, to run my fingers through his hair and tell him that everything would be okay. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was a man, and I was his mother. I forced myself to stay on the couch. That night I barely slept. I listened through the walls for any sound, any sign that he was okay, but I heard nothing. The house felt empty, hollow, as if it had swallowed us both whole. The next morning I made breakfast waiting for him to come down, but he never did. The food sat untouched, cooling on the table. I thought about knocking on his door just to check on him, but something held me back. By the afternoon, I heard the shower running, the soft patter of water against tile. It was the first sign of life I'd gotten from him since last night. I let out a small breath of relief. Then I saw him. The bathroom door was wide open, the steam curling out into the hallway. He stood with his back to me, the golden glow of the small window casting a soft light over his damp skin. His shoulders were tense, his hands braced against the sink. I should have walked away, I should have given him his space, but something in me moved before I could stop myself. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and without thinking, I wrapped my arms around him from behind. He exhaled his whole body, going still at my touch, but he didn't pull away. I rested my head lightly against his back, feeling the heat of him, the dampness of his skin, my fingers smoothed over his shoulders, his hair still wet from the shower. "It's hard for me," he said suddenly, his voice low and raw. I don't know how to go on, living. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him that it would pass. That heartbreak never lasted forever, that one day he would wake up and this pain would be a distant memory. But I knew words wouldn't be enough, so I stayed silent. I ran my fingers through his hair the way I used to when he was younger, when he would lay his head in my lap after a long day. He used to love that, and now here he was allowing me to comfort him in the only way. I knew how he leaned into my touch just slightly, and then without warning, he pulled away. He stepped out of my arms and walked out of the bathroom, his feet leaving damp prints on the tile. I turned to watch him, my arms still feeling the absence of his warmth, my heart twisting in ways I didn't understand. He disappeared into his room and shut the door. I followed a moment later, pressing my hand against the wood. "Edward." I called softly. Silence. "Let me in," I pleaded. "Mom," he said, his voice muffled, tired. "Please. I want to be alone." I closed my eyes, my forehead resting against the door, my fingers curled against the frame. Every part of me wanted to push inside, to gather him in my arms and tell him he wasn't alone, that I was here, that I would always be here, but I knew better. I forced myself to walk away. That night I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, my body restless. My mind kept drifting back to him, to the way he had. Let me hold him, the warmth of his skin beneath my hands, the way he had exhaled like he had been holding his breath for too long. I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to make it better. And yet deep in my C*******T, I felt something unusual, something I shouldn't have felt. I turned onto my side, pressing my palm against my forehead, willing my thoughts to stop. This was loneliness. This was longing. In the early morning light, I stood outside Edward's room, hesitating. His door was open, just a crack revealing a glimpse of his unmade bed, the tangled sheets a testament to his restless night. I had been awake too, lying in my own bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts looping back to him, to the sadness in his voice, to the weight he carried that I couldn't seem to lift for him. I didn't intend to intrude, but my feet had led me here, drawn by some invisible pull. I was about to turn away when his voice broke. "Quiet, Mom." It was groggy, rough from sleep, then softer. "Come in here, please." I swallowed, stepping inside. He was sitting up against the headboard, shirtless. The blankets pooled around his waist. His hair was messy from sleep, his face still touched by exhaustion, but there was something else in his expression, something unreadable. "Give me a hug," he said. His voice, barely above a whisper, hesitated. It was such a simple request, but the weight of it settled deep in my C*******T. I had always comforted him with touch when he was younger, pulling him into my arms when he was sick, holding him close when the world felt too much. But he wasn't a little boy anymore. Till I couldn't refuse him. I sat on the edge of the bed and he leaned forward, wrapping his arms around me. His body was warm, solid, familiar. I held him, smoothing my hand over his back the way I used to feeling the way. His breathing slowed the tension melting from his shoulders, but something was different. There was a charge in the air, something neither of us spoke of, but both of us felt it was unspoken, impossible to define, but real all the same, a kind of energy, a pull that made my skin prickle. My hands moved instinctively, soothing him. I began massaging his shoulders, my fingers pressing into the knots of tension. He let out a deep sigh, leaning into my touch. I moved lower to his arms, his torso feeling the rise and fall of his breath beneath my fingertips. "You're so tense," I murmured, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He nodded, his eyes closed. I haven't been able to relax in days. I wanted to take away his pain, to make everything feel lighter. My hands worked gently over his C******T, feeling the warmth of his skin. He exhaled again, his body easing under my touch, and then he looked at me for a moment. Time seemed to stretch. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite name, something searching, something lost. I didn't know who moved first, but suddenly we were closer, our breaths mingling. His lips brushed mine, soft and fleeting, a touch so brief it might have been imagined, but it wasn't. We both stilled, eyes locked. A silent moment passed, stretching between us before he pulled away, clearing his throat. "Mom," he whispered, his voice unreadable. I felt my heart pounding, my breath unsteady. "I'll make you some coffee," I said quickly, standing before I could think better of it. I hurried downstairs, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the coffee pot. I told myself it was nothing, just a mistake, just the lingering emotions of the past few days. The scent of coffee filled the kitchen, grounding me, and I focused on the simple routine, the warmth of the cup, the sound of liquid filling it, the steam rising in delicate swirls. I didn't hear him come down. I only felt it. His arms wrapped around me from behind, a slow, careful embrace. I stiffened for a moment, caught off guard before slowly exhaling. "Thank you," he murmured against my hair. I swallowed. I should have pulled away. I should have said something, but instead I stood there, allowing the warmth of his presence to settle over me. I shouldn't have liked it, but I did. Edward had been quiet all morning. He sat on the couch, his arms resting on his thighs, staring at nothing. In particular, the daylight filtered through the curtains in soft ribbons illumina, the sharp angles of his face, the tension in his jaw, the furrow of his brow. I watched him from the kitchen, my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, feeling the weight of his silence. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, that settled in the air between us, thick and unspoken. "Do you want me to make you something to eat?" I asked. Finally breaking the stillness, he shook his head. I set my coffee down and stepped closer. "You're still carrying it, aren't you?" He exhaled through his nose, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just feel heavy, like I can't shake it off." Understood that feeling too well. "Lie down," I said, nodding toward the couch. "I'll help." He gave me a questioning look, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He didn't resist. He leaned back against the cushions, stretching out as I sat beside him. "I know what I'm doing," I assured him. "Just trust me." Edward hesitated, but then he closed his eyes. I started with his arms, my fingers working carefully over the tense muscles in his biceps. He had always been strong, even as a child, but now that strength had hardened into something else, something built from years of responsibility, from the quiet burden of holding himself together. His breath hitched slightly as I pressed into the tightness, then relaxed. "That's good," I murmured, "just breathe." He did slowly, steadily. I moved to his shoulders, my thumbs kneading into the knots, feeling the tension slowly unravel beneath my touch. He sighed, melting slightly into the cushions. "You always know what to do," he murmured. I smiled softly. "I just pay attention." His C*****T rose and fell in a deep, steady rhythm, his body growing heavier with each movement of my hands. I traced the muscle down his arms, then to his torso. Feeling the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt, he sighed again, softer, this time more at ease. I worked down his legs next, kneading gently at the muscles, easing away whatever stiffness he carried. He was wearing shorts and my hands moved carefully over his calves, pressing into the tension there. "You're good at this," he murmured, his voice half drowsy. "I told you," I said lightly. "Just close your eyes. Trust me." He did. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic breaths escaping his lips, the quiet hum of the house settling around us. When I was done, I leaned back, brushing my hands over my lap. "How do you feel?" He opened his eyes, blinking up at me. "Better." I smiled, reaching to smooth back the hair from his forehead. "Could." He sat up slowly, stretching his arms. Then, before I could move away, he wrapped them around me, pulling me into a warm, familiar hug. "Thank you," he murmured against my shoulder. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the steady beat of his heart against me. The warmth of his arms felt like comfort, like something I had missed without realizing it. Then softly, naturally, he kissed me. It was brief, barely more than a touch. But it was there. I pulled back slightly, searching his face for an explanation. But he just looked at me with something unreadable in his expression. I didn't understand. I wasn't sure if he did either, but neither of us spoke. The moment lingered between us, delicate and unspoken, before he finally smiled, just a small, tired smile. "Do you want coffee?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He nodded. I stood up, walking toward the kitchen, feeling his gaze follow me as I went. We just continued living as if everything was the same, before both Harold's and mine's wounds slowly healed. We took care of each other, and it seems that was. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories.